This time on Rad Rat Video, we talk about how much money is too much to spend on your skateboard. Do you really get more and more performance the more money you spend? Also going to talk about 5 more other questions, so let's get into it. Welcome back to Rad Rat Video, where you can learn something new about skateboarding 3 times a week. Subscribe so every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday you can get a new skateboard video. On Wednesdays, I answer your questions on this series, Ask Rad Rat. If you missed the last couple of videos, this month I'm going to be answering a lot more questions per video because I've been getting so many. I just want to experiment with answering more of them. You can also start thinking of your own questions to send in. You can do that through going to radratvideo.com. All right, first question is from Skateboard Jones, who asks, what determines the hard way of doing a trick? If you're doing a 180 over a rail into a bank and it's in front of you, is front side or back side 180 the hard way? Does it change for an ollie? And what makes an alley-oop? So you're asking the same thing. An alley-oop is just the hard way. It's just a weird way to say it. I don't know how that made its way into skateboarding. It's from basketball. You know, it's the move where you pass it to somebody in the air and then they dunk it. And it comes from a really weird Englishy way of saying go in French, and then oop, which is just up with a fake French accent. So you're saying go up. It's like a code word. So you would say it and the other team wouldn't know what it meant. I think that's where it came from in basketball. I have no idea how it made its way into skateboarding because it's got nothing to do with anything like that. But the way that it works, basically, if you were to do a trick stationary, let's say you're right next to like a line in the pavement or right where the grass ends or something, you're right next to it and you do a trick. Which way are you going to go? Are you going to land closer or further away from the line? So you got the line behind you, you do a front side shove it, you're going to land behind the line. Okay, so imagine that's an obstacle, that's a rail now. The easy way is to roll up to it with it behind you, front shove, and you land this way. If you're to try to do it the other way, you try to travel forward with a front side shove it, that's a lot harder. So these things become really obvious as you try them. With your particular example, if you're approaching a rail in front of you, you're rolling up to it front side, you're going to ollie into a bank. It's a lot easier to pop the front truck over, pull it up, clear the back truck, and go over it that way. The hard way is to clear the nose and then pull the back truck all the way around and land it that way. So as you practice this stuff, it'll become very obvious, but in general, going forward while going front side is hard, going backward while going backside is hard, and that doesn't matter whether you're spinning with it or it's just like a flip trick, but hopefully that clears that up for you. Also, it works the same way with grinds. So let's say you're doing like a backside grind. If you're going to spin front side out of it, that's really hard. Because let's say you're doing like a 5-0 and you're going to do like a backside spin out of it, you could grind it most of the way through and then just drop off. But if you're going to pop the tail, clear the back truck, and then pull the front truck around, it's so much harder. So here's an example. This is Ocean Hollow doing a 180 nose grind, 180 out, but it's the hard way out because he has to clear both trucks. And it seems pretty obvious why that's harder. Hopefully that helps. The next question is from Rick Rack, who asks, what are your thoughts on non-skaters playing realistic skating games such as Skate and Session? So back when Skate 2 and 3 came out, I played a lot with my coworker, who I think he used to skate a little bit when he was a kid, but he didn't skate. And we still had a lot of fun playing the game. He still learned a lot about skateboarding. He would still push around Mongo, and he would call tricks the wrong names when he would tell me about stuff that he did sometimes, but we still had a lot of fun playing the game. I wasn't mad at him for that stuff. I knew that he didn't skate, and I don't think there's anything wrong with being a fan of skateboarding. You know, if you're into skateboarding, you like to watch it, but you don't do it, I don't know if that's really a problem. I used to love watching like BMX and the X Games, or all the other competitions, the gravity games, and all that kind of stuff that they used to do. I used to love watching that stuff. I never did it, but I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I still play BMX games from time to time, and I don't think there's a problem. So I don't think that I would judge anyone for doing that. I also am glad that other people are buying skateboarding games that aren't skaters, because if they didn't, Tony Hawk 1 would have been the last skateboarding game. There never would have been a Tony Hawk 2 because only skateboarders would have bought it. So it helps skateboarding in general for other people to have interest in it. But if you're really obsessed with skateboarding games and you play them all the time, I would at least encourage you to give it a try. Think about getting a skateboard. Think about going out there and seeing if you can learn how to roll around and do an ollie or something. But I don't think you have to. The next question is from Marcus Shorn, who asks, I'm skating for 20 years now, and just a few days ago, me and some of my friends were talking about the good old days when we just started skateboarding. and how so many things change. And we realize how your whole perspective on skateboarding changes over the years. What changes in your mindset do you realize after skating for X years? Greetings from Germany, Marcus. So for me, I started in 2001, so we're going on like 17 years. And for me, one of the biggest things I realized as I got further and further into skateboarding is that it's not your entire life, which for me it was. Everything was skateboarding. I was obsessed with it. I would watch skateboarding videos anytime that I wasn't actively skateboarding, which was hours and hours every single day. Completely obsessed with it. It took up my entire brain. I would draw pictures of skateboarders when I was at school. Everything was skateboarding. And it took me a while to realize that you can have a life outside of it. So for me, I was never into sports because who has time? I'm not going to watch a 3-hour football game when I could watch a couple skate videos and I could go out and I could practice my new trick or something like that. And so I thought when I was a kid that you couldn't be a skateboarder and like sports. It didn't make any sense. How could you have room for both? And so I remember I was watching, I think it was Chomp on This, and Costin is, he wears progressively more and more basketball stuff. And so like he'll have a hat on and then the next clip he's got other stuff. And there's this shot where he's doing a grind and he's got like a full basketball jersey on and he's got a headband, he's got like everything. And I was like, what is he doing? He can't be a basketball fan, he's a skateboarder. And I didn't understand that you could do more than just skateboard in your life. One of the other things was smoking. I thought you couldn't be a skateboarder and smoke because why would you? You want to have peak performance if you're skateboarding. You have to have maximum lung capacity. Why would you be smoking and making it harder to skateboard? Skateboarding is the only thing. And so I remember seeing, I don't remember who the skater was, but it was during his part. He lands a trick and he like pulls out a cigarette and starts smoking. And I was like, seriously? People do that? And I didn't realize that you could have other things going on in your life other than skateboarding. That was one of the biggest things. But one of the other things for me in particular was I used to be really, really into extremely technical variations of tricks. So let's say you do like a pressure flip. Okay, so you do the pressure flip, the board comes around. As the board ends, it's flipping toward you like a kickflip because it's spun. So it's gonna end like this. You could tap it with your toe and do like a late half flip, do like a pressure half flip, late half flip. And I thought that was like such a big deal because the trick's name is really long. It sounds really complicated. It's really technical. The board's doing something and then it's doing something else in the air and you're using both feet and it's so crazy and cool. But I didn't realize that was kind of pointless. The board's going to finish the trick anyway. You're just kind of tapping it slightly so you can call it something else. And I thought that those kind of things had so much meaning. It was so important that I touched this part of my foot instead of this part, and now it's technically a different trick. But these days I would rather just see something done really well. I love seeing technical, difficult stuff, but not if it's pointless. Not if it's just, you did it just to be able to say you could do it. So that was one of the big changes in my skateboarding. And for me nowadays, skateboarding is more about going out and getting fresh air and just enjoying myself and just rolling around and doing some tricks and cruising and having fun versus trying to cross off tricks off of a list that I wanted to land. So for me, those are the biggest changes after 17-ish years. The next question is from CT, who asks about big spins out of grinds. Do regular 180 shove-its with a 180 body rotation count when coming out of a grind on a rail or ledge? I've only been skating for a year and a half and see different takes on this. I was under the impression that big spins are 360 shove-its with a 180 body rotation, but maybe out of a grind it's different? It's not different, but there is a little bit of weirdness when you're doing tricks that slide sideways because you can't do a 360 and a 180. You can't do an exact big spin out. So let's say you're doing a frontside tail slide and you're sliding along like this. If you do backside 360 or backside 270 shove it and you follow it 90, that would be a big spin out. Okay, or you could do it frontside 270, big spin, frontside big spin to fakie. But it gets a little confusing because you have to do that 90 no matter what. So if the board does a 270 and you do a 90 this way, that'd be a 360 shove it. Like it's technically the same amount of spin both ways, but one way you're following it and one way you're not. If you're doing like a regular grind, like a 50-50 or something, then it's just exactly the same as you would expect if you're doing it on flat. But it is slightly complicated when you're doing no slides or tail slides. So hopefully that helps. It's not too complicated. The next question is from Ethan Chu, who asks, how do 5-0 grinds and nose grind with a tail or nose touch compare to 5-0 grinds and nose grinds without a tail or nose touch? Is it less respected? Does it make grinds more stable in a way? All the 5-0 and nose grinds I see in videos have no tail or nose touch, yet a board touch still counts as the grind? Well, I learned about 5-0s and nose grinds from this video. It was a trick tip video with Willie Santos, and the way he does it is with a clear tail touch the whole way. And as I was learning tricks, this was the ideal 5-0. This is how a pro skateboarder does a 5-0. And for me, I still kind of like doing them that way because, well, there's a couple reasons. First, the nose is as far up as you can get. So it's the most exaggerated 5-0 motion you can do versus if your front truck is just barely off. It's technically a 5-0, but it was more obviously a 5-0 if you're like that. And for me, one of the other things was it's less of a... let's say you're doing either a 5-0 on a ledge, like a wider ledge, or you're doing a manual right next to it. If they look exactly the same, that seemed like kind of a waste to me. If you're doing a 5-0 where you're perfectly straight, you're balanced like a manual the whole way, and you grind it out, then that wasn't as cool as having the nose way up, like tail jammed down at a slight angle so the wheels aren't really rolling, they're like kind of skipping along. Doing that felt more like an actual grind, like a separate trick from a manual to me. These days, I think I do them more the balanced way. I did a trick tip for them right here, and I did them more like a manual than with the tail touch. But it's up to you. I don't think one or the other is necessarily easier. I think it's easier to do the balanced way if it's higher because you have to pop up and then put the truck down. So if you're going to pop up and then land all the way back, then you have to ollie higher for the same height thing, if that makes sense. So I think most people will do the balanced version after a while, because they'll do higher and higher obstacles, and that kind of becomes their style. So I don't think there's a problem either way. If you like dragging your tail, go ahead and do it. The last question for today is from Nick Flowers, who asks, how much money is too much money when it comes to trying to be a talented skateboarder? I know shoes and decks can get expensive over some time, but does it really matter if they're cheap? Can pricey apparel or hardware actually improve your performance? Now, your hardware and all of your skateboard parts and everything are very, very important. Of course, a couple examples I can think of. There are a lot of pro skaters who will only use a deck from a certain part of the mold. So I think Almost advertises that they do one deck per mold, but for most anyway, they'll push about 5 decks at the same time. So the top and the bottom, they'll have like 35 plies there, and it'll make 5 decks. And certain pros will only want like deck number 2, because the concave will be more and more mellow in the middle, and then it'll get steeper again. And so they'll want a specific one. And that has nothing to do with how expensive the board was, but they want that specific one. They don't just want the same shape, the same size, the same graphic. They want this specific spot in where it was pressed. And that level of precision becomes more and more important as you get really good. The other example is Rodney Mullen, who, I know I mentioned this before, he talked about putting balls from ball bearings underneath his truck in the little hollow spot there and taping it over so that the weight of his board was slightly more centered toward the middle as opposed to more the weight being lower. Such a minor, tiny, tiny little thing. But at that level, when you're really good, having exactly what you need is a bigger deal. But again, neither of those are more expensive. They just are what they are. So as long as you're buying something that's pro level, you should be fine. If you really want to progress and get really, really good, having something that you like and sticking to it might be the more important thing. So I wanted to think about all the different parts you could come up with and see what I could come up with. So for the deck itself, the more expensive decks you get will typically last a little longer. They might have, shock resistant plates or vertical laminates and stuff like that. And that'll help the board last longer and be a little more solid, not as flexible, more rigid. And that's good for making the board last longer, and that helps just keeping the board longer. Having the exact same board for longer will help you slightly, but you don't have to spend the maximum to get the best possible deck. I think any pro level deck that's not going to fall apart on you is going to do pretty good as long as it's the right shape for you. Let's talk about bearings. This one is obvious. The more you spend on bearings, the better they are. This is kind of the one where there's the most difference. You can buy $10 bearings, you can buy $150 bearings. Nothing else on your skateboard is going to have that much difference between them. But you get what you pay for in that regard. but I don't think having faster bearings will make you better. It'll make it easier to do certain things in lines or whatever, keep more speed on a ramp, but it's not going to make you progress quicker. Something in the middle there will probably be fine. The next thing is your wheels, and this one there's quite a bit of variation. If you buy like Walmart wheels, they'll just fall apart. I remember doing a trick one time and the wheel just split in half and there was like dust went flying, like it just shattered like chalk. Don't get those, but on the higher and higher end, you'll find a couple of different things. I think Richta has a wheel that has a slick patch on the inside. So if you're locked into like a crooked grind, the part of your wheel that's sliding will be slick and then it'll be a little bit easier. But for the most part, having decent wheels is good enough because the formulas don't change as much on the higher end. They'll have the same amount of bounce back. They'll have the same amount of flat spot resistance for the most part. Get higher and higher, they'll get a little bit better, but I think you reach kind of a point where it's good enough. You can spend double and it's like 2% better, you know? But something else to keep an eye out for is the shapes. There are a lot of brands that have specialized shapes for certain things. You can have like sharper corners that help for locking into like a Smith. They won't slide as much, that kind of thing. But again, that shape, that's not really an expense thing. Just finding the right one for you is going to be a bit more important. Next thing was trucks. Trucks are, again, there's not that big of a difference as well. When you get higher and higher price-wise, they'll get lighter. You'll get more expensive types of metals. You'll get like magnesium and you'll get all this other kind of stuff like that. And they'll get a little bit lighter and a little bit better, but it's not necessarily going to be that big of a difference. If you have trucks that you like, they're the right height, they turn well, they react the way that you like them to react, then that's good enough. You can see skaters who are sponsored, pro skaters who are sponsored by kind of lower end truck brands. I'm not going to say who they are because people will all disagree, but there's certain brands I just don't like at all, and yet they have a pro team, and that pro team is all full of people who are much better than me. So if you pick a certain one, you like how it works, and you stick to it, again, I think you'll be fine. Grip tape is a different one. Most grip tape is basically the same thing. It's just sandpaper. Some is a little bit grippier than others. Some will peel off a little bit better or a little bit worse. But having mid-range grip tape is going to be fine. But what I use is called DKL, non-abrasive grip tape. It's kind of like a ping pong paddle type of feel to it. I did a review of it right here, and I think this one is a pretty good upgrade from regular grip tape because it makes your shoes last longer and all that kind of stuff. The old version would peel right off right away. The new version they sent me to test does not peel off at all. I've had zero problems with it. That one I think is worth upgrading because it actually saves you money in the long run. I'm not sponsored by them, by the way, but I think that one's a pretty good upgrade. But the last one you mentioned was shoes, and you know, people ask me about shoes all the time, and I just buy whatever's on clearance. I can't tell you too much about that. I had some really, really cheap shoes when I first started skating. They were like this really hollow foam, like I think they were Vans technically, but they were just like the cheapest ones you could get. And that was tough because they made my feet hurt. They had this really weird shape on the inside. But again, going mid-range and sticking to that same basic shape, I think you'll be fine. So just pick something you like, stick to it, keep practicing, and you'll get good regardless of spending hundreds of extra dollars. If you disagree with that, let him know below. Hopefully he can get a good setup and stick to it. So that's it for now. If you have any questions, go to radratvideo.com and submit them on my Ask Rad Rat forum right there on the homepage. Otherwise, you can send them to me on Twitter or Instagram. I have links to those in the description. But until next time, here are some more videos to check out, and tap my logo right here on screen to subscribe, and that way you can keep learning new things about skateboarding 3 times a week. Thanks for watching.